Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Pass Network conference session on workforce development. I'm excited to see everybody here. Today, we're going to attempt to answer a question we've all been asking. Who is going to build it all? And we have an excellent group of presenters to address this. So I'm just going to jump right into it and introduce ourselves. I'm Gunderson with Pass Massachusetts. It's nice to see you again. We have a few others here. You can see them on your screen, so I'm going to let them say hello. Mark.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. Hey, everybody. Mark Pignatelli with ICF, a director here. Looking forward to the discussion today.
And Chris?
Hi, everyone. Chris Legiadre. I'm a senior design and construction manager with the Community Builders.
And Ben?
Hi, everybody. I'm Beverly Craig. I work with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and looking forward to this discussion.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for being here, and let's go on. So this is what we're going to talk about and try to cover. We're going to cover some big picture workforce development initiatives, kind of a quick survey of what the landscape looks like. We'll zero in on some of the initiatives that have been happening right here in New England with the MassCEC and Energize Connecticut training programs. Then we'll talk about some lessons learned from these programs and a few of the missing pieces that we haven't really covered. Then we'll get into a trades training case study from Chris about how this is happening on site and how we're actually, some ways this is being implemented by project teams. And then Beverly will take us home with a little look at some big picture state workforce training initiatives in Massachusetts, kind of covering a few different things that are going on. And then we'll have some questions and discussion with all four of us, and we'll take some questions from you guys as well out there. So let's just start with big picture workforce initiatives. And Mark, you're up for this section.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, feel free to go to the next slide. I'm just going to touch on this briefly and hopefully steer some folks into some further research on your end. But just to touch on a couple examples from a national perspective, NYSERDA, they've been doing a lot of work over the years, really even going back to about 2016, my understanding, around passive house and looking at subsidizing passive house construction and also looking at developing workforce and such. Tri-County Regional Energy Network, 3C REN out in California, is doing some pretty cool stuff, really looking at strengthening the local job markets, touching on passive house, ZNE, and a few other examples you can see here as well. ComEd in Illinois, some other IOUs out there in California as well. So definitely starting to see this pick up on more of a national front. And then just an example of a local perspective here in Massachusetts and really in New England is the Green Jobs Academy based out of Worcester. And they're really one of New England's regional energy and weatherization training facilities. So they're doing a lot of hands-on work, trying to increase the skilled labor in the weatherization space, which is really great. Next slide. So as I mentioned, I'm a director at ICF, and I did want to just share one of the teams within ICF, WIPs, as we refer to them, Workforce Innovations and Poverty Solutions. They are really doing a lot of work from a national perspective around workforce development. Some of the work includes reskilling local workforces due to economic shifts, focusing on vulnerable populations and job seekers with multiple barriers. So really trying to look at dislocated, disadvantaged workers, underemployed, things of that nature, and really trying to work with them to provide some solutions. Aaron, if you go to the next slide, I touch a little bit on a few examples of what ICF is doing. One of them is High Road Training Partnership. This is a California workforce development partnership grant that ICF is working with, and it's really focused around energy storage and microgrid training and certification. Right now, we're anticipating over 600 participants to receive this training and certification. So really exciting to see this start to come together. In a similar vein, we're doing some work in Michigan with this energy assistance program. So this is really looking at and connecting low-income residents with energy security, self-sufficiency services. At the moment, we're engaging with about 9 grantees and 5 utilities and 2 state agencies. So ICF comes in to really help facilitate the identification of energy security success metrics across at-risk populations, and things of that nature. So just a couple examples to share. And, I'm going to be moving pretty quick through these slides just for time. So you can keep going to the next one here, Aaron. And this is where we're going to jump into MassCEC and some of the work we've been doing in the passive house realm. So just in case folks aren't familiar with MassCEC, this is really a statewide energy efficiency program brought to you by the sponsors of MassCEC that you can see listed down on the bottom of the slide here. And really the common goal of helping residents and businesses across the Commonwealth save money and energy, leading the state to a clean and energy efficient future. So as we roll here, I'm going to talk a little bit about where a lot of these programs really came about, really where they were born from. And it goes back to about 2018 through a stakeholder discussion. And it really was the primer, so to speak, that led to passive house incentives for both projects and workforce development that was supported in the last 3-year plan, 3-year energy efficiency plan from 2019 to 2021. So back in August of 2019, ICF, who is helping to implement these programs on behalf of the sponsors of MassCEC, in conjunction with Passive House Massachusetts and others, we rolled out these training offers. And so fast forward to today, the Massachusetts Joint Statewide Electric and Gas 3-year energy efficiency plan was just recently approved a couple months ago for the next 3 years. And that plan continues to support these passive house initiatives. And there's also a great focus on beneficial electrification. So we're happy to report that. We're happy to continue to work on these programs, and I'll get into this a little bit more. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to touch a little bit on what this current 3-year energy efficiency plan is really looking to do. And there's a huge emphasis on workforce development. You can see here there's investments close to $50 million. Part of this is really working closely with the Mass Clean Energy Center, and Bev, who is with us today, will talk a little bit about this as well. But it's really exciting to see some of the work that's going to be taking hold here around, for example, the Clean Energy Pathways, this internship program, really looking at targeting the youth, so to speak, 18 to 24-year-olds, multilingual, from underrepresented backgrounds in the EE workforce. So really trying to focus on some of these sectors and build this workforce, as well as coordinating with vocational and technical schools and other public high schools. So if you go to the next slide, this just really, I thought, was kind of interesting to share. Some of the focus areas you can see on the left, and really the commitment through this 3-year plan: electrification, equity, workforce development. These are really the top priorities, and really going to be dovetailed into the energy efficiency programs to help the Commonwealth meet zero emissions by 2050. So this is going to be a critical component to meeting that goal. If you keep rolling, Aaron, we're going to dive in now to really talk about what these passive house initiatives entail. So this slide essentially highlights the training and the workforce development program that both ICF and Passive House Massachusetts have partnered with on behalf of the sponsors of MassCEC. And we'll also touch on Connecticut. We're doing a very similar project in Connecticut, and it really involves no-cost trainings and also reimbursing professionals who are pursuing passive house credentials. So you can see on the left, there's some numbers there from FIAS and PHN, and then also some stats here in terms of number of trainings. We've reimbursed about $82,000 towards these professional reimbursements in Massachusetts alone since 2019. So some pretty good stats. This talks about projects. So we've been offering passive house incentives for multifamily projects. This gives you an idea of the incentives available. This is for 5+ story multifamily projects. And to date, so far, we've processed about $1.5 million since 2019 in incentives for projects that are looking to pursue passive house certification. So you can keep going, Aaron, and we'll get into some of, what does this mean? How does this impact the Commonwealth in terms of multifamily passive house projects? And prior to these incentives, back in 2018, we had our first multifamily passive house project in the state. Since these incentives have rolled out, we're now actually seeing over 6,600 units. I believe that's close to 85 buildings that are enrolled and looking to pursue the Passive House certification. So pretty phenomenal market reaction there, and the incentives are really intended to help offset some of the incremental costs to achieving Passive House. I'll catch my breath here. I know I'm going pretty fast. Energize Connecticut. So similar to MassSave, Energize Connecticut with Eversource and Avangrid, they offer a similar statewide energy efficiency program. So my team at ICF, partnering with Connecticut Passive House, we work together to also roll out a similar Passive House training initiative in Connecticut. So if you go to the next slide, we'll touch a little bit on their 3-year plan as well. And really, this started to kick off back in September of 2020. So a little bit more new compared to Massachusetts. We had an inaugural training back in January of 2021 with a great turnout, over 300 attendees. And the Connecticut's EE and demand response plan really does focus on Passive House, workforce development, and also the beneficial electrification component. So great to see that. And the next couple of slides, we'll dive in a little bit more on some similar stats we're seeing in Connecticut. Again, you can see the numbers here. This is a little bit of a newer program compared to Massachusetts, so we're not quite at the rate we're seeing in Mass yet, but certainly great attendance in a lot of the trainings we're bringing in. We're getting interest from professionals to pursue certifications, which is fantastic. The next slide is going to touch a little bit on the incentives offered through Energize Connecticut. Very similar to the Massachusetts incentives. There's some nuance, but again, if you're 5 units or more looking to build multifamily projects, work with Energize Connecticut. You can look at leveraging these incentives to pursue Passive House certification. So these slides touch a little bit on some of the numbers that we're seeing in Connecticut. Again, it's a little bit earlier. A lot of these are in the design certified phase. I think there's about 35 buildings in the pipeline right now. And so this is just showing you a little bit of what we're seeing at the building and the unit level. So certainly on the right trajectory, and I think we'll see this to continue to grow. So with that, I know that was pretty quick, but look forward to questions, and I'll hand it off to Aaron to take it away.
Thank you, Mark. These incentives for both projects and for trainings have obviously been enormously important in increasing the growth of Passive House projects here in Massachusetts, and so we're starting to see in Connecticut. What I want to touch on are some of the lessons that we've learned from organizing these trainings, hopefully things that folks out there can take away to implement in other places. First, just involving industry partnerships, as Mark hit on. This has been a collaborative effort between ICF, Passive House Massachusetts, and the Connecticut Passive House down in Connecticut. We've also been working with organizations like Passive House Network and FIAS, and then local groups like the Northeast Home Energy Rating Alliance. We've worked with local builders groups and others to try to organize some of these trainings and reach different audiences. And we've also worked with different consultants and training organizations out there that try to provide some of their own content to work with us and provide content for these programs, including some of the folks you're seeing here on your screen. This gives you just kind of an example of different types of trainings we offer, different names that are out there. We try to cover a lot of different territory, and I'll cover a bit of this here. These are some of the folks who have presented them. So we try to involve a lot of different presenters, a lot of different experts, a lot of different folks who are doing this in practice who can share their experience. So this brings me to a few different lessons learned. The first is to involve the industry. As Mark hit on, a lot of this came through a stakeholder event at the very beginning, but following that, we established a training committee and worked to solicit feedback from folks in the field. So we did this through meetings with the committee. We sent out surveys. We interviewed folks. We did a lot of research into available trainings and different training needs. We really asked kind of 2 core questions. What skills are needed and what trainings can teach them those skills? And who is this training for and what do they need to know? And really use that to help inform what trainings we're going to offer, how we're going to structure them, and how we're going to make them available. Reach out to different experts to treat sessions or to teach these sessions and to provide content and case studies for them. We knew there's a lot of great material out there, a lot of people who are doing this work. In a lot of cases, this was simply trying to collect it and bring it together into a form that people could use, into a training that they could actually utilize. And as I said, we partnered with established trainers to run a lot of these. The second big lesson learned was to bring the training to them. So we did a lot of these trainings and are still doing a lot of them directly at company offices. So architecture firms, general contractors' offices, even few developers we've gone to and directly went to them. Some of these were folks who asked us for trainings. We sort of made a mass appeal saying we had these available, and folks can reach out if they were interested. But we also directly reached out to a few, the larger firms that were out there that we knew were not yet involved in passive house, but we sort of wanted to. Passive house was really going to take off. We needed them involved. So we also directly kind of made appeals to folks to take us up on these offers of no-cost trainings for your teams. We also work to conduct trainings in different geographic areas. In fact, one of our biggest trainings for an in-person training was actually one we did way out in Western Massachusetts, so way out in the Boston area, in a less populated area. We actually had a lot of people show up because there weren't as many trainings available there, and folks were really excited to have something in person. This obviously changed once COVID hit and limited our ability to do in-person activities. But for a while, the idea of going to different geographic areas to hold these outside of the general Boston area was a big successful way to get more people involved. And as I said, partner with a lot of other organizations. So this could be groups doing regular events, industry groups and trade groups, just different folks that are out there that are already trying to offer trainings for their interest area. Work with them to provide content. And then expand the audience. So initially, we were very architect and designer heavy, and this had a lot of benefits. We wanted to train these folks. We had good content for them, but we really wanted to reach out and expand the group we were providing trainings for. So this meant reaching out to builders and trades and GCs and developers and engineers, a lot of different types of folks to really provide trainings to them. And then develop different levels of training. We use a lot of 101s and intro level sessions to kind of reach those with a passing familiarity, a passive house, or maybe some of the firms, where you had one or two passive house designers on staff, and those folks weren't working on these type of projects. To really get these intro level trainings in there. And then we work to develop technical content and in-depth sessions for more experienced passive house professionals, folks who were already doing this or already had their consultant or developer or designer's certification. As well as different types of folks in various fields who, they're not directly working on project teams, but folks like raters, real estate professionals, policymakers, try to really address different types of audiences who we knew as passive house grew, they were going to need to be aware of this and aware of what was different with passive house buildings. And the last lesson learned was to go virtual. This one was kind of honestly forced upon us when COVID sort of forced everything to go virtual, but it was incredibly successful for us. We ended up drawing larger audiences and more diverse audiences by offering virtual trainings. So we did a lot of live trainings, but they were live virtual over Zoom or other formats here. We also developed an on-demand virtual learning center where we could record these trainings and make them available for people to watch anytime. And that was incredibly successful. We've now had over 2,400 views on these online trainings. If you remember back to the numbers Mark was showing you earlier, this is almost double this is almost doubling our audience simply by going online and making these trainings widely available. So we have an online learning center with a variety of courses that people can enroll in for free and watch these training videos. We also have our own Passive House video library on our Passive House Massachusetts website, where we have these courses and others. Basically, any session that we do as a Passive House organization, we make available to folks for free afterwards. And this is a great way to just make these trainings accessible, remove the barriers to folks learning about this content, and try to make it easy for people to access this. So we're looking forward this year to returning to doing some in-person sessions, but the big lesson we've learned is to remain doing virtual ones. So whether that means doing hybrid courses or recording all the in-person ones that later air on demand, just finding ways to make these trainings accessible to everyone anywhere. With that said, there's still a lot of gaps in this training program. The biggest one is in trades training. We've tried, but so far we honestly have been unsuccessful in terms, that's my opinion. We've been unsuccessful in reaching the hands-on trades. We haven't had enough courses for whether it's carpenters or contractors or different trade specialities. We need more of them. And part of this is the need for hands-on skills development. Switching to online allows us to reach a lot of people, but it removes that hands-on training component. So hopefully with our ability to get back to in-person sessions, we can try to overcome this gap. But it's really an area where we want to focus on, and I want to see what other ideas other people have to focus on this. So these are some of the gaps here, some of the missing pieces, and those are some of the lessons learned. Hopefully good stuff you guys can take away. But what I'm going to do now is move on. We're actually going to invite Chris to take over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Chris, you can share yours. And he's going to give us a kind of a case study of some of this trades training in action.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. Let me get this slideshow pulled up real quick. All right. Yeah, so like Aaron said, I'm Chris Legiadre here from the Community Builders. We'll walk you through a little bit of a training case study of a project that recently completed construction in Northampton, Massachusetts. So touching on some of the feedback and the information that both Aaron and Mark had presented, this project was designed 2017. It began design. So at the very beginning of that curve that Mark was showing with passive house projects, it broke ground in 2020 and recently completed in early 2022. So I'll walk through a little bit of the challenges that we ran into with passive house certification, on the boots on the ground work, how it really translated. So a little overview about the project. It's a 53-unit new construction affordable rental housing development, a little over 61,000 square feet, which includes a 5,000 square foot attic, which is inside the envelope of the building, 3-story building, the open shop project, general contractor, and then a little bit about the systems of the building. It's a VRF mechanical with ERV ventilation. It did have propane fired central hot water, which doesn't meet necessarily the all electric building, but at the time it was really the best solution that we had for the project. And also has a 58 kW rooftop PV solar array. So this is all about finding the right team. How do we find the right team to build this project? It was one of the first passive house multifamily buildings in Western Massachusetts. So there was no immediate apparent choice for the general contractor. There was no one who had done this a lot, who was the obvious choice for us to call and say, can you build us another passive house? It also had complicated geometry based on the neighborhood requirements of where this building was located. A lot of the passive house buildings, initial passive house buildings at least, are traditional flat roof parapet buildings, where this one is craftsman style. It's got a lot of roofs, it's got a lot of dormers, sheds, hips, gables, all coming together, complicating the transitions of both the air barriers and the building envelope. So 2 unique challenges to this project based on location and the design criteria. So what was the process we went through? We targeted general contractors who had experience with similar energy efficient projects, LEED, Indoor Air Quality Plus, Enterprise Green communities in our area who had performed well on those type of projects, with the idea being if they could master those and perform well in those kind of projects, they have a good shot of meeting our passive house requirements. We also tapped into our sustainability consultants in the area, as well as the one who was on our project with us, for documentation of local projects where they thought the contractors had exceeded blower door tests, if they were doing it for stretch code, just for building code requirements, or just overall performed really well on the project. And then we also included specific requirements within the RFP that we issued to those general contractors related to passive house. So a little bit about TCD for those who don't know, we're affordable housing developers. We have a corporate standard to incorporate sustainable development to all of our projects. We've done LEED Gold, LEED Platinum, Enterprise Green. We actually have a passive house prior to this one in Pennsylvania. And we have a corporate standard to kind of meet these sustainable goals. So the excerpt on the bottom is from the RFP that we issued to the contractors to kind of set them up for what we were expecting out of them, since we didn't have an obvious passive house contractor to go to. So we were letting them know it's designed to passive house certification. We expect it to certify at the end of the day. We prefer a contractor who had passive house experience, knowing that really wasn't an option for us, or they were committed to demonstrating the willingness to achieve the passive house results. And then we also put the caveat in there, if the general contractor and the associated subcontractors did not have passive house training or experience, we would require them to go through the FIAS certified builder program and give us a letter of completion upon their completion of that program. So we're requiring them to go through some level of training to prove to us that they are committed to the project and that they're willing to learn if they didn't already know the process. In addition to that, we also required those subcontractors and our general contractor to go through training from our sustainability consultant, Stephen Winters. So we had a full day training with our general contractor, and then we had it divided into 2 separate trainings based on the trades. So one for the building envelope trade, so the framer, the insulator, the roofer, just to make sure they understood what they were getting into with the building envelope. We even included the foundation contractor, so he could be sure he knew what expectations we had for plumbness and tolerances to make sure that we can make all the seals that we were requiring. This was led by our passive house consultant. They went through passive house principles, which were a refresher to the team since they had gone through that certified builders training before, and also project specific. We went through the details of the project, where we thought the challenges might be, mainly the roofs for the envelope consultants, and walk them through, let them ask any questions they had, and lead them through the project to set it up for success. Training number 2 was focused on MEP trades. So the VRF mechanical system, the ERV ventilation, how are we using car dampers, all the nuances of the MEP systems that were critical to making this project succeed at the end of the day. Then we also relied on testing and verification, both in the shop. So we had shop-built exterior wall mock-ups that we tested. We did air infiltration testing on the mock-ups. We did flashing inspections with our contractors, our architects, our consultants, passive house consultants, all there together to see it. We also had regular inspections, both in person and over FaceTime, to go through things as they were constructed. This building ended up being constructed with panelized exterior wall construction. So how do those panels come together in the field to make sure those seals are tight? How do we modify the panels when they come out if they don't fit exactly but still maintain that air tightness that we're looking for? We had site-built mock-ups, first window install to make sure the flashings worked. Flashings kept water out, but they didn't let air in. So that kind of balance of how that works throughout the window assemblies. Insulation inspections, as you typically would have, exterior wall, roof, the roof, depth probe gauge for the thickness of the insulation in the attic, air barrier reviews. And then we started to get into this more specific tests, intermediate whole building blower door tests, unit compartmentalization tests, duct leakage testing, and then obviously the final building blower door test at the end of the day. So I guess the question would be, was it worth it all? Did the training work? Did the project succeed? Did we meet our goals? So at the end of the day, the answer is yes. You can see some of the test results that we had. Window test, we can see we had a target of 1.779, and we passed under 1. So we far exceeded the requirements for the test. You can see some of the tests set up in the picture in the background, some of our larger windows. We utilized an Intis kind of tilt-turn window on the project. Seals really well in the grand scheme of things. Unit compartmentalization testing, also you can see a pass below the target threshold. We tested the most difficult unit that we have in the project, which would be the third floor smallest unit, to give ourselves a challenge to make sure we were meeting on the tightest unit, and then hopefully that would translate to all the other units, and it did throughout the building. Intermediate blower door test. So at a midpoint of construction, when most of the building was erected, exterior sheathing on, dried in, we conducted our first test to see how we were doing. There were some areas where temporary zip sheathing had to be put into openings that weren't installed yet, temporary doors that hadn't been installed yet. So the test results are a little not exact, but they give us a good gauge of where we were. So halfway through the test, we were at 0.31 ACH 50, about half of the requirement that we had to meet. So doing really well throughout the project so far. And the final blower door test still passed, not as good as the intermediate test, because we were putting some aspects of construction in there that were temporary. Obviously, a zip sheathing is better air barrier and air shield than our actual window would be, and doors, which are notoriously a little leaky, but still, successful results at the end of the day. So in our opinion, as a developer and the operator of the building, the testing obviously paid off. The training that we required for the contractors paid off. And at the end of the day, we have a group of contractors that are now trained and are really experienced and really perform well at a passive house project that can take that on to the next project they work on. So with that, I will turn it over to Bev for her part. I will stop sharing.
So what a great topic today, and so many great explanations of training programs that are out there. A lot of the ones we've heard today are very much about upskilling existing workers. And so I'm going to sort of roll it back a little and think about, how do we get new people? I think all of you are aware that most general contractors are having trouble recruiting new people, and especially subs are. So I'm Beverly Craig. I work at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. We're actually a state agency. And we are not the same as MassCEC, different, just about 50 people or so. And actually, most people who know us in Massachusetts probably know us because of a workforce program that we have been running for about 10 years. It's our internship program. We pay for students to come work at clean energy and efficiency companies within the state. We just hit our 5,000th intern that we've funded over the years, the 9 years that we've been running this program. And generally what we do is we qualify employers that are working on efficiency and renewable energy. And then we fund $16 per hour over the summer for them to work for these companies. So that helps offset the cost of employers actually bringing them on and teaching them how things work in this field. Just so you know, we have been really working on equity issues. We have our numbers always for this internship program have been great in terms of rates of women and in terms of race, but it reflects very much what our colleges enroll. And obviously that's not the same as what the population in general in Massachusetts has. And so for the last 2 years, we've been hiring 4 training providers to help recruit minority students that are underrepresented in our program, specifically Black and Hispanic students, and help pair them with employers, as well as support them throughout the summer with additional enrichment programs. That's been a really great program. We've gotten a lot of press about it, actually, and we're really excited about the first 2 rounds. And it's really interesting to see how much the employers that are participating in this program have been excited about the diversity, inclusion, and equity work and trainings that we have as part of that program. So rolling back, I think, the big question for all of us is we have all these states now and the federal government that are interested in getting to net zero emissions by 2050. Where are those jobs going to get created? And I've got to say, one of my favorite reports that's out there is from New York, the state of New York. The Just Transitions job study that they put out this last year does a great job of looking at New York specifically with that target of getting to net zero by 2050 and trying to figure out where the jobs are going to get created. And every region of the US is going to be a little different, and Canada would be a little different as well, but I still think it's a really good guide. In general, they believe that about 10 jobs will be created for everyone that's lost because of this goal of getting to net zero, and that it's a huge number of new jobs. And the interesting thing is the sector we're talking about now, buildings, is the vast majority, over half of the jobs that are added, especially within the near term by 2030. The most sizable increase in jobs that they see is in the residential HVAC and residential shell or envelope trades. So mostly that's about retrofits, but some new construction as well. We know that about 80% of the buildings that exist today in both New York and Massachusetts are still going to be around in 2050. So more of the challenges around retrofit than new construction, but obviously both are needed. And just to give you a sense of how much just in New York they're talking about, by 2040, they expect 200,000 new construction and buildings related jobs. By 2050, it will be up to 400,000 new. So Massachusetts is undertaking a very similar study to this, and we're already seeing very similar numbers. And I would suspect that this emphasis on having to bring a lot of new people into the construction trades is going to be typical throughout North America. So Mark mentioned that some funding, $12 million a year, has been allocated for MassCEC to focus on training people who live in environmental justice communities in Massachusetts for climate critical occupations. And one of the first things we did as soon as we knew that that funding was going to be coming was to reach out to a lot of the employers that had been participating in our internship program and ask them, for HVAC companies that have a mini split focus, are you going to be hiring? Where do you hire? What kind of gaps are there in finding people? What are you finding that's hard? And this slide sort of summarizes a lot of those takeaways, but across the board, we hear that there's a lot of lack of knowledge in communities, environmental justice communities, people who are either have lost jobs in COVID and are trying to retrain, in underemployed, people who are returning veterans, all kinds of categories of people who might live in environmental justice communities. There's just really a lack of knowledge about the kinds of jobs that are in the buildings trades that are going to be growing very big. There's also this concern that a lot of times people run through training programs on the trade side without really understanding what the job's going to be like. And so a lot of employers suggested that we need a lot of job shadowing, or like a day in the life of kinds of videos that are around for people in different trades that will be necessary for our transition to net zero. There was there's definitely going to be a need in environmental justice communities, not just about technical training about how to put in a mini split or how to do high performance carpentry or how to become an electrician, but also sort of bringing people up to a level that they're going to be able to find a job at the other end of that technical training. So in Massachusetts, especially if residential retrofits and HVAC are going to be an issue, we know that driver's training is one of those support services up front that's going to be needed. In Massachusetts, we stopped providing driver's training in high schools over 2 decades ago. So really a lot of families, if they don't have an extra $3,000 sitting around and that's not the first priority in their family, a lot of those people don't have driver's licenses right now that might be seeking these jobs. Also, like the organizations that are going to be very good at finding the best people to go through these trainings, a lot of times they're not very educated about the career paths, the opportunities, the pay. And so really educating everyone is going to be needed. So I will say, I think across the board, at least in the US, one of the big places to start looking for new entrants is in vocational schools. So there are a lot of vocational high schools that do exist. What I would say is they're not very well connected with employers, especially in this high performance space. And so going to those vocational schools, getting to know what their programs are like, how they run their co-op programs, how you can get people involved in some of the companies that are doing this work, and would be the first place to look. I would say a lot of states like Massachusetts probably are also using recovery money from COVID to sort of amp up the training programs that exist already. So in Massachusetts, for example, the programs you see right here are vocational school programs that are now being funded by the state to be run at night. So say a carpentry program, an electrical program, an HVAC program on night or weekends. So those are great for adult learners who might not be able to commit as much time, but you already have an HVAC lab. You already have a carpentry lab. So MassCEC, we have this $12 million that we're getting. We've started putting out some solicitations related to those. So the first is around support for minority and women-owned businesses to expand and get expertise in climate critical fields that we know are going to be growing a lot. And we did put out an RFP for $4.5 million. That program's going to accept applications every 6 years. Or every 6 months, and continue doing that. It's so far the response has been great. We had over $13 million of applications, over 20 applicants in the first round, and are in the process of scoring those right now. We also know that a lot of the organizations or training providers that currently do some training in this space probably don't have this range of services that we know we're going to need. The support services up front that might be like the brush up on math, the connections with the employers, the mentoring once people are on the job. And so our approach has really been to put out some planning grants for organizations to pair up and group together and basically to pay them to write a grant application for a multi-year program. We know a lot of our community-based organizations in particular have very little staff time. And so asking them to write competitive applications without giving them some capacity building is just not really feasible. So our first effort is these planning grants of $50,000. Hopefully around September or October, we will be having the actual implementation grants for the planning that will be in the range of between $250,000 and $500,000 for multi-year training. And so, our internship program was picked up by NYSERDA years ago, and we're doing the same, looking at what their best practices are, because they've been working in this space of workforce training for almost a decade now. Mark mentioned that. So actually, one of the things we did first was to go to them and say, hey, who are your superstars? What makes for a good workforce training program for priority populations in New York? And so we interviewed about 10 or 12 of their best performing partnerships in New York that are reaching out to these priority populations. And we are holding webinars. We've already held one of them with 3 of the best partnerships. So each of them has a team of people, and These are programs that I would say generally have a waiting list for them. They have a really high percentage of placement, often like 75 to 80% placement in jobs, which is fantastic. And those are all recorded on our website. Folks are welcome to take a look at those. I think there's a lot of great lessons and honestly very inspirational programs. The other thing I will say is, so I've been talking about new entrants for the most part. Besides the program that Mark and Aaron were talking about, Massachusetts also has money from the state Office of Workforce and Labor that trains existing workers and upskills their work. And I think, again, a lot of states are probably putting a lot of money into this upskilling throughout the nation in the US and also in Canada. So what I'm talking about here is something that I think could be replicated other places. So in Massachusetts, Built Environment Plus, which is our USGBC affiliate, who does a lot more than that, including a lot of passive house work and trainings, has been successful in tapping state Workforce Express program, which is basically allows them to provide companies that are under 100 employees and pay into state unemployment with free workforce training, up to $30,000 per company. And so they have like a list of amazing courses with incredible instructors that they can provide. And actually, companies in Massachusetts that are interested in getting their own employees like passive house designer certified can get that for free for their employees. So it's even better than the 50% off that the MassCEC program is offering. But of course, not everybody's eligible for that. Students, companies that are over 100 employees, but it is a great place to come up with new content as well. I think Aaron was talking about places we don't have a lot of content. And one of those places is actually in the builder kind of area, the subs, the trades. And so I just want to give one example of a course that's being developed under this Express program. So companies under 100 employees could do it. The Studio for High Performance Design and Construction, which I know Aaron is also involved with, and Built Environment Plus are pairing up to provide a high performance building for carpenters course. And this is like very focused on hands-on. 6 4-hour workshops will be provided, and with very specific, like the kinds of things that Chris was talking about, the mock-up of the windows, things that you can actually do the hands-on work. And so it's great to see this kind of thing developing and using that portion of state funding to create these kinds of things as well. I'd encourage anyone who likes this kind of idea to talk to Studio for High Performance Design and Construction and see if you can adapt it to your state as well. And finally, I'll say one other place that we have to talk about is Passive House Accelerator. What a lot of amazing content. So for the tradespeople, for the builders, they have construction tech recordings. For the architects, the developers, the mechanical engineers, there's something for everyone on that website. And I do encourage people who are interested in providing trainings that are similar to these. It's a great who's who of who you could have come talk in your state, and maybe even just replaying some of the recordings that are there and having the live Q&A afterwards with the presenter might be a good idea. So that's what I've got on the state level. And I think we want to jump into discussion now. Is that right, Aaron?
Yes, Bev. Thank you so much. It was great to kind of get this overview of all these different resources that are out there for workforce development. I think a lot of challenges that we're all facing is becoming aware of all these programs and making sure the folks we're trying to reach are aware of them, because there really are a lot of great resources out there already. I want to thank Chris for giving us a really great example of this kind of be implemented on site into a project, and Mark for talking about all these great initiatives that ICF is doing with MassCEC and Energize Connecticut. And we're now going to turn it over to some questions. I have a few for our panelists, and we'll turn it over to the audience questions as well. All right. Hello, everybody. Great. Now we're live for questions. So we have a good discussion going in the chat room. Great to see everybody there. You can continue to ask questions in the chat room, and we'll ask them live. Chris, I want to go to you first. There's been some good discussion about the training that you ran for the trades. So I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit more about how folks responded to those trainings. Do you think that how do you think they did they react positively to the trainings? Were they excited about learning these new skills? And do you see them incorporating this into future projects, Passive House or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think generally the subcontractor and the general contractors were certainly excited to really understand what Passive House was all about. I think leading up to the trainings, we heard a lot of fear from the contractors, especially out in the Western Mass area, that what is this Passive House? How hard is it going to be for us to achieve? And when we really got into the trainings, they really realized it wasn't that much different from the stretch code in terms of air sealing and things like that they had been used to. The systems were very similar. The biggest difference we found was in the testing and making sure that we had proper time in the schedule to allow for that testing to happen, both initial testing and then follow-up testing, just to make sure that things were keeping the same quality as we moved through the project. We did have initial window tests that we mentioned in the presentation, which was done by one foreman for the window contractor. And then later on in the project, we had a new foreman who didn't understand all the details of that. And we actually had our Passive House consultant on hand one day doing another test, and he stopped by to test a window, and that window actually failed the test. So it was a good opportunity for us to stop, figure out how many windows this new foreman had installed and how many we had to go back and fix, which would have been a much larger undertaking if we had waited to the end of the day when we did our final blower door test and realized the building failed now. So, I think tricks like that were really good. We learned a lot of different aspects. The subs that we talked to who were on that project are taking that stuff with them, the knowledge. They're trying to implement it where they can. I mean, I think certain projects, it might be infeasible to, necessarily change the product to meet the Passive House requirements, but they can still install with the same care that they gave it, right? It might not be appropriate to do a triple glazed window everywhere, but you can still install a double glazed window really well with the same principles that you learned from the Passive House project. So we certainly are seeing that being taken off by our contractors. And from an owner standpoint, we're pushing contractors and we want to work with contractors who have that level of care. So the hope is that we push it enough and the trades realize that it's important to the owners, and they'll come along for the ride with us.
That's great. There were some really good remarks about the mock-ups being used as well. And I'm curious how you incorporated those, if you did, into training the subs. And do you see maybe in future projects using the mock-ups on site to kind of provide some trainings right then and there?
Yeah, so as a standard, we incorporate mock-ups on every project that we do. I think the level of them varies depending on the project, the complexity of the project, the space on site to do a mock-up potentially, who the subcontractor is. So I think we'll certainly keep doing the mock-ups to some capacity. You learned a lot. We did change things in the shop mock-up based on lessons learned from the contractor in the initial testing. We really had a hard time with the keep water out, but let water out of the system, but don't let air into the system. That's a challenge, right? So we went through a few different variations of how to really seal that and where that seal happens to make that work. So I think the mock-ups are really invaluable to learn how it's really going to come together. We can draw things and model them all day, but it's really how it gets put together in the field that makes it reality.
That's great. I think the hands-on component is so critical when it comes to training. Bev, in the end of her remarks, mentioned the development of this hands-on carpenter course, which is going to happen here in Massachusetts, which I'm looking forward to. Part of that was actually based off something that EMU Systems is done out in Denver. So I want to give a shout out to them and anybody who's out in Colorado. They do a pod workshop course incorporated with the CPHT training that's been working really, really well. And I think trainings like that are going to be sort of the future. We really want to do a lot more hands-on stuff. COVID put a big hold on that, but I think that's a good opportunity for more trainings in the future. I want to shift gears a little bit because there were a lot more questions in the chat about kind of the expansion of these programs and how they can be implemented in other places. So Mark, I want to go to you first because I think the first example of this is Connecticut, where they took the trainings that we have here in Massachusetts and the incentive programs and implicated almost the identical system. I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit more about how that came about. Where was the demand in Connecticut for these trainings? What did they look to in Massachusetts to sort of decide what was successful and what wasn't?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's been great working with Energize Connecticut to try to build this up, and obviously had a good model in Massachusetts to kind of keep that momentum going. I mean, I have to give a lot of credit to to Eversource and Avangrid, who are the sponsors of Energize Connecticut. I mean, it's really them that wanted to replicate this. They looked at some of the early successes in Massachusetts and said, hey, let's try to do a similar workforce development initiative focused on passive house in Connecticut. They already had in the works those incentives for the multifamily projects, and really wanted to, in parallel, do both incentives for workforce and projects. So in terms of some of the pre-context to those discussions, I don't know how much demand there was in Connecticut for this or not, but we've seen some really good turnout with a lot of the lunch and learn style trainings, the workshops. We've had to do these all virtually, of course, still, but and even with the reimbursements, professionals pursuing the PHN and FIAS courses to become accredited. So we're starting to see that pick up more and more. I think we've noticed in some cases where that reimbursement offer in Massachusetts was rolled out first, we are seeing that there's some professionals that are going over state lines for work, and I think that may impact some of the uptick we've seen a little bit slower in Connecticut on those reimbursement amounts. But, kudos to Connecticut Passive House working closely with that group. I think the momentum's there. We're going to be doing that through all of next year, which is great. So that's going to continue to move forward, and we'll look to continue to improve and hopefully see more professionals get involved as we move forward. So
that's great. And you mentioned Connecticut Passive House is kind of one of the actors there, and they definitely were an important part of bringing those trainings there. And I think that's what we've seen in a lot of these cases, is that these are very state driven. In Massachusetts, it was members of Passive House Massachusetts and members of other housing groups and affordable housing agencies, folks part of different community groups. Those in the state, MCAM, but there's other groups like that here, climate groups that organized around this years before the incentives started to sort of get these in place. And I think the funding can come in different sources in different states, but the key was having that sort of those active participants, kind of push the organization to award this funding. So that's what we saw work here, and hopefully in other states that you can find ways to make these similar proposals, but you need to find that organization that's going to provide the money to make it happen. Shifting gears here a little bit more to some of the other examples of trainings that Bev, that you were mentioning. One thing that I was struck by after the opening of today's session, we saw those great videos of some high school students in New York doing some projects around Passive House. So Bev, I'm curious if you have, well, first, if you've seen anything like that in Massachusetts, of course, but what do you think is going to take to implement something like that? Is that something that MassCEC can kind of help provide, or is there other sort of resources we can turn to get similar education programs in high schools?
Yeah, I'm definitely hoping that there will be more of a focus on youth as well. I think I mentioned the vocational school programs are open at night, and even MassCEC has been very involved with Mentor Compliance Group with after-school programs at vocational schools, taking students out onto different sites. I would expect that there'd be a lot of other, some of this grant funding, I'm sure some of the people will focus on youth, and that would be really exciting. And I guess I mentioned, in New York, some of the best practices. Somebody on our webinar last week from Hudson Valley Community College was saying one of the more successful ways of recruiting youth for them has been putting everything into virtual reality. So they come to classrooms with virtual reality machines, and they'll show you what it feels like to weld or to climb a ladder on an offshore wind tower, or to install insulation, or to install a mini split. And then they also show sort of what the classroom experience looks like, so you can see the lab and stuff. And that's been a really great way for them to recruit. And I think that's a great idea. I'd love to see that more often. It's a great way to turn on youth, especially to things, some people, I feel like the electricians part of things has been, we're just not anywhere close to the number that we need. And so specifically marketing that trade would be really important with things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point. Using the sort of the new technology, both to reach folks, but also to Passive House and high performance building is full of new technology and exciting developments. This isn't like the old school building. This is new exciting stuff, and really promoting that can help draw interest. So that's a great point. Now there's a question in the chat. Actually, I think directed at you. Everyone can answer this. Maybe Chris, you can view a little bit of this as well. But as to what extent do you think the traditional unions will be involved in some of these training programs? and how do we get them more involved?
Aaron, could you repeat that? I didn't hear.
Yeah, it's to what extent will the traditional unions be involved, the union workers be involved in some of these training programs, and how do we reach more of them?
Yeah, I would, we've had a lot of discussions with IBEW, the electrical union. 103 in particular has been taking a lot of they take the top 5 electrical students at every vocational school right now, which has really been adding to the equity of folks going into their apprenticeship programs. I think the IBEW in New Bedford area is also really interested in electrical related to offshore wind. Offshore wind, I think all the contracts are requiring union electricians. So that's definitely going to be the path for electricians. Carpentry, I think there's more, there's for the bigger projects tend to be union, but not everything in the state is. So we'll have to see. But we at least have not had a lot of engagement with the carpentry unions. I hope that will happen. So I think it's important because they have great, very structured apprenticeship programs, how to actually offer those. Because sometimes it's hard. You usually work during the day and then you're taking classes at night in most of those apprenticeship programs. And sometimes you need support for that, right? Whether it's childcare or transportation or work boots or whatever. And so hopefully some of the programs, some of the applicants who might apply for some of our money will think about those kinds of support services to support people while they're in apprenticeship programs.
That's great. So folks, if you have more questions, please add them to the chat room. I can see what you're posting there, so we can ask stuff directly. But Chris, I want to get back to you a little bit because I think the model of trainings that you were that you did in Northampton is a really great one to look at moving forward. I mean, you did a combination of requiring folks to go through the certified tradesperson trainings and the kind of big organized ones, and then you did organize some of your own for the trades, and then you had folks on the job site working with folks there as well, and working with the mock-ups. So it's kind of a combination of project-specific focused trainings. So Mark, I think that's one of the lessons for us as we kind of look forward to developing more MassCEC trainings and others, is to kind of focus these trainings on project sites and bring these trainings to them. So Chris, my question for you is, how do you think the model that you have there can be implemented on other job sites easily? Or is this something that sort of every team has to develop themselves? Or can we come up with sort of a plug and play training module that folks can just implement for their project team?
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that's repeatable throughout the industries, particular. I mean, obviously there's a difference between training on the passive house principles and knowing what the actual details of the specific project are, because there's a lot of ways to get to passive house. It's all about how the project wants to get there. So it's certainly important to have that base knowledge of understanding of what the FIAS program is, what the principles are, but also you got to really know what the details of the specific project are. So I think there's certainly a training that could be set up, a format at least, an outline that could be distributed to owners that really have to implement. I think the owners are really the key, right, to get them to put it into their bid documents, to get that as a requirement. And unless FIAS wants to help join the party and add it to their requirements, I don't think they're going to do. It's really, I think, on the owners to make that a requirement.
So with that said, as an owner developer, what brings you on board? What made you interested in passive house?
Me personally?
Yeah.
So I come from a background, I'm an architect by training, even though I work for a developer now. I'm LEED certified, and I've started my CHPC phase 1. So I'm halfway through my certified training. So to me, sustainability is really important to just everything in general, how the world's going, where we need to build. So I've always been, the sustainable mindset. And I think TCB too is all of our projects have a baseline requirement to meet. It used to be LEED Silver, now it's Enterprise Green. It's always some different program, but and we're seeing more passive house projects in our portfolio and pipeline as well. So I think it's just where we're going and where we should go.
That's great. And Bev, I know through the MassCEC, you helped with this very successful pilot program for passive house, affordable housing projects. So I'm curious, through your work with that, obviously the incentives that you were providing, that MassCEC were providing, were pretty important for the developers and the project teams. But to what extent do you think these project teams are going to continue moving forward with passive house, even if, say, those incentives aren't there?
So I think the way that affordable housing is prioritized in Massachusetts, the QAP, which most states have like this scoring ranking, Really, we've had a breakthrough this last round with how many points you get if you go passive house compared to other standards. And so I think there's a naturally built-in reason that affordable housing is interested in that. It will be very interesting to see the market rate ones that Mark was talking about, like how many of those, after doing modeling, will move forward with that and find that it's helpful enough in their marketing. I mean, in a theoretical sense, you would think, less noise from the street is a big plus for living in a multifamily. Like compartmentalization is a really big plus when you can't smell what your neighbors are cooking. Some of the things people don't like about multifamily are much lessened in this kind of high performance construction. And so if that picks up in the market rate, and I think the ventilation, honestly, after COVID, everybody's worried about ventilation, but if we can provide healthier indoor air quality environments for everyone, I think that's marketable too. So we'll see how much people keep going, but I think once you learn how to do it the right way, it's hard. You don't usually go back. You may not, even with somebody not checking your work all the time, you probably are going to do similar in-field installation when you know how to do it the better way. So I think I'm optimistic.
That's great. Okay, we'll wrap up here. I think that's a very great last point to end on, especially these trainings were meant to really get folks excited about passive house, learn the basic skills, and so far it seems like the ones who go through these programs are excited to keep doing this going forward. I want to thank Beverly, Chris, Mark for being here. It's been a tremendous session, and I look forward to seeing the rest of all the sessions here and seeing everyone in person a week from today. Take care.